On January 19, 2012, one of the most famous companies in the history of photography filed for bankruptcy protection. For more than a century, Kodak had helped people preserve their lives. Weddings, birthdays, vacations, children's first steps. For several generations, taking a photograph almost meant using Kodak. But the technology that eventually destroyed the company's old business model was not created by Sony, Canon, or Apple. It was created inside Kodak itself. Almost 4 decades before the bankruptcy, Kodak did not lose because it failed to see the future. It saw the future earlier than most of its competitors. But when that future finally arrived, the company tried to force it to work by the rules of the past. To understand Kodak's decisions, you first have to understand the scale of its success. In the late 19th century, photography was complicated. Large cameras, glass plates, chemicals, darkrooms, and technical knowledge made it something mostly reserved for professionals. George Eastman and Kodak helped turn photography into a mass hobby. Cameras became simpler, and the difficult work of developing and printing photographs was handled by the company. All a person had to do was point the camera and press the button. But the camera itself was only the beginning. The real strength of Kodak's business was that every next photograph required new spending. You needed film. The film had to be developed. And then the photographs were printed on paper. One camera sale could turn a buyer into a Kodak customer for decades. A person bought the camera once. But film, they bought every time someone blinked in a family photo, and everyone had to be photographed again. According to Cambridge University researcher Kamal Munir, by the 1950s, Kodak controlled almost 70% of the American amateur film market. Gross margins on film sales were also close to 70%. In other words, Kodak was not just selling photography. It had built an extremely profitable system in which every press of the button brought the company a little more money. Film was not just one of Kodak's products. It was the engine of the entire company. And the company was not exactly eager to sacrifice that engine for a strange box that recorded blurry photographs onto a cassette tape. In 1975, a young Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson was given an experimental assignment. He had to study a new electronic sensor known as a CCD and figure out whether it could be used to create images. Sasson took a lens from a Super 8 movie camera, a CCD sensor, an analog-to-digital converter, 16 batteries, and several dozen electronic components placed across 6 circuit boards. The result did not look much like a modern camera. It was a large metal construction with a lens, wires, and exposed electronics. It looked less like the future of photography and more like a toaster that had learned to watch people. But the device worked. It captured light, turned it into an electronic signal, digitized the image, and recorded the information onto a magnetic cassette tape. There was no film inside. To see the result, the cassette had to be placed into a separate device connected to a television. Recording a single photograph took about 23 seconds. So, for selfies, the device was not exactly ideal. But in December 1975, Sasson created the first self-contained digital camera. Inside a company that made billions because every camera needed film, there appeared a camera that no longer needed it. Today, it is easy to look at this moment and ask, how could Kodak not understand that it was looking at the future? But in 1975, the answer was not that obvious. Sasson's digital camera was bulky. The image quality was low. Recording one frame took 23 seconds, and to view it, you needed a television and additional equipment. A film camera was more compact, more familiar, and gave people a physical photograph they could hold in their hands. The digital prototype did not look like a product an ordinary family would want to buy next year, and Kodak's leadership was right about next year. The problem was that this was not about next year. The prototype showed what would happen decades later, when sensors became better, electronics became smaller, and data storage became cheaper. Kodak did not simply reject the invention. In May 1977, the company filed a patent application for an electronic still camera. The patent itself was issued in December 1978, so Kodak understood very well that the technology mattered. There was just a fairly large difference between saying, "This could be the future," and saying, "Let's destroy our most profitable business for it." The company had to answer a much harder question. What would the digital future become? And how exactly would Kodak make money in it? The popular version of this story sounds something like this. Kodak invented the digital camera, got scared of it, hid it in a basement, and kept selling film until it was too late. It is a convenient story. It has a brilliant inventor, short-sighted executives, and an almost cartoonish safe where the future gets locked away. But reality was more complicated. Steven Sasson continued working on digital technology inside Kodak. In 1989, he and Robert Hills created a self-contained digital SLR camera. The company developed sensors, professional digital systems, consumer cameras, printers, and image processing technologies. Kodak was not standing outside the digital revolution. On the contrary, it was inside it. In its official announcement about beginning Chapter 11 proceedings, the company stated that in 2011, approximately 75% of its revenue already came from digital businesses. Importantly, this did not mean only digital cameras. Kodak's digital businesses also included printing systems, image processing systems, commercial technologies, and services. But the number shows the main point. Kodak was not ignoring the digital world. It had digital products. It had patents. It had engineers. It had one of the most famous brands on the planet. And it still ended up in bankruptcy. Apparently, having the word digital in an annual report was not enough to automatically become a digital company. The problem was not only the technology. Kodak learned how to sell digital products, but it never created a digital business model capable of replacing the profits from film. For decades, Kodak had taught people to see photography as a physical object. You took a picture, you brought the film to be developed, you waited, and then you received an envelope full of photographs. They were placed in albums, put in frames, shown to relatives, and kept for years. So when photography became digital, Kodak made a logical assumption. Film might disappear, but people would still want to print photographs. The company began building a digital version of its old system. Instead of a film camera, a digital one. Instead of lab development, a home or store printer. Instead of film and chemicals, paper and ink. New technology was supposed to lead the customer to a familiar final product, the printed photograph. But people's behavior was changing much more deeply than Kodak expected. Digital photography did not simply become a cheaper way to get the same print. It became a completely different way to use images. Kodak was building a more convenient bridge back to printing, and people were slowly realizing they no longer had to cross that bridge. Film forced people to think before every shot. The number of pictures was limited. Every frame cost money, and the result could not be seen immediately. That is why family albums usually contained weddings, birthdays, and vacations, not 17 almost identical photographs of lunch. The digital camera removed almost all of these limits. People could take hundreds of pictures. Bad ones, delete. good ones, keep on a computer, and then send by email, post on a social network, or simply show on a screen. A photograph no longer had to be a family relic. It could be a message, a joke, proof that you had been somewhere. A photograph of a cat doing absolutely nothing special. But for some reason, everyone still needed to see it. For decades, Kodak had built a culture of preserving memories. But the new world began using photography to share current experiences. This was not just a change in the camera. The meaning of photography itself had changed. From inside Kodak, the situation looked almost impossible. Film brought enormous profits. Digital cameras operated in a competitive electronics market, where prices fell quickly and products became more and more similar to one another. Every digital camera sold could mean less film sold. Every improvement in digital technology threatened the factories, labs, stores, and distribution system that had fed the company for decades. If Kodak moved too slowly, competitors would take the future. If it moved too quickly, it would destroy its most profitable business before finding a full replacement for it. This is called cannibalizing your own product. Sometimes a company has to release a product that will reduce sales of its old product. Because if it does not, someone else will. Kodak invested in digital businesses, but it kept trying to connect them to the old film logic. The new business was supposed to support the old one, but the real digital revolution demanded accepting that the old business might never come back. The film market continued to shrink. Digital cameras became cheaper. Electronics companies could compete with Kodak without having its film factories, development network, or huge retail infrastructure. And then the camera began turning into just one function of a mobile phone. Now people did not need to buy a separate camera. The camera was already in their pocket. Kodak found itself trapped between two worlds. The film world that had made it great was disappearing, and the digital world it had helped create did not give it the same control or profit. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak and its American subsidiaries filed for reorganization under Chapter 11. This did not mean the company vanished overnight, but the symbol was incredibly powerful. One of the main creators of mass photography had lost to the next transformation of photography, not because it lacked technology, not because it lacked patents, and not even because it did not work with digital products at all. Kodak treated digital photography as a new product. In reality, it was a new behavior. Kodak created a camera that did not need film, but Kodak itself was built around the belief that every photograph should consume something: a new roll, a chemical development process, a sheet of paper. Digital photography gradually removed that consumption. When photographs became almost free, unlimited, and instantly available, the old Kodak machine had nothing left to feed on. The story of Kodak is not simply a lesson that big companies should invest in new technologies. Kodak did invest. The real lesson is much harder. Sometimes to survive the future, you have to destroy the business that made you successful. You have to give up not only the old product. You have to give up the way of thinking that seemed right for decades. Kodak saw the turn earlier than others, but it could not follow the new road all the way to the end.